You know, there are days, aren't there, where it feels like everything is connected, and that's because it is. That's because everything is connected, especially when it comes to geopolitics. You do not need to be a revered, a respected academic in order to recognise that. But if you are the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews, it's rather unlikely to come as a surprise. I speak, of course, of Phillips O'Brien, who has been of enormous help to us in understanding, and I think it's fair to say predicting, much of the movement in that part of the world since that illegal invasion. And the latest comment you've made, Phillips, is that Ukraine was just knifed in the back, with particular reference to this so-called ceasefire in the Black Sea. I mean, even Rupert Murdoch's Times this morning is sceptical, even close to being critical, which suggests that there is not much cause for celebration, certainly not in Kyiv.
This is where this was heading. Trump wants to work with Putin. I mean, people seem to forget this and think that the United States is somehow going to negotiate even-handedly with Ukraine and Russia. That's a dream. The United States wants to reach a deal with Putin now. In fact, Putin is seen as a valuable friend by Trump. And the whole point of this, one of the key things Trump wants to do is end sanctions on Russia as soon as possible. All his talk about sanctions is, to put it kindly, BS. Yeah. What he really wants to do is get rid of them. And yesterday, in some ways, the Band-Aid was ripped off.
Sorry to interrupt you. Why does he want to get rid of them?
To make money.
It's that simple.
Yeah. I mean, I think he views Russia as an economic partner of himself personally, maybe of the country, though I'm not quite sure he even cares about the country. But he always wanted to get back to business with Putin. He said that over the last 3 years. He's hinted at it since he's become president again. This is the goal: to get back to work, to make money, and Putin is, in his mind, a good thing. But he needs the sanctions gone to really do it.
And of course, to delight Putin is something that will also bring him great joy.
It's amazing. The only thing he's been loyal to in his entire life is Vladimir Putin. I mean, he's not been loyal to his wives. He's not been loyal to his business partners. He's not been loyal to the United States. But by God, he's been loyal to Putin.
Vice President. He hasn't been loyal to his own Vice President, of course, on January the 6th, and prior to that, not loyal to any of his former colleagues. You're absolutely right. The only person... That's a line, isn't it? Have you written that one down before?
Well, I have something trying to say to you. I mean, I've been hunting for critical comments about Putin. The last critical comment he made, which even wasn't that critical, was, I think, 2017.
It's incredible, actually, to reflect on
and that. Try and find an actual critical comment about Putin. He can be critical about Zelensky, critical about Canadians, critical about Europeans, critical about Taiwanese. He's very critical about democratic countries and democratic leaders, but he's not critical about Putin.
And that, of course, leaves Zelensky in an almost impossible position. We talked about this yesterday, about the encounter in the Oval Office when Trump could quite obviously lie about not knowing anything about the signal leaks or the signal exchange, but the journalists seemed incapable of pinning him down. Zelensky went there overnight and said Putin is lying about what is going to happen in the context of this ceasefire. But of course, if the White House pretend to believe him, then Zelensky's in a whole heap of trouble.
Well, they clearly led Zelensky on, or led the Ukrainian delegation on. Because if you saw Zelensky's first reaction to the ceasefire deal yesterday, he said, well, see, I've agreed to this. By the way, the Ukrainians were always quite mixed about this from what I have heard. But they agreed to this ceasefire deal because one of the things they were told is if Russia doesn't abide by it, then the United States will give you more aid and will have harsher sanctions on Russia. And that's what Zelensky says. Then it turns out when the United States releases its own version of the deal with Russia, it includes sanctions relief for Russia, which was not expected by the Ukrainians.
But was expected by you.
Yeah, I feel a bit like Cassandra. People have to understand he wants to deal with Putin. He wants to get rid of these sanctions. And he's now the United States has maneuvered Ukraine into a position where Ukraine can stop them by, in a sense, blocking the ceasefire. Europe better back it. If not, then the United States is going to put huge pressure on everybody to agree to these sanctions to be lifted.
What's the buckle point? What's the breaking point? Because long term, we've spoken before about the difference between long term and short term. The
Yeah.
possibility of Ukraine not going it alone, but Europe
Yeah.
essentially supporting them. Sine
Yeah.
USA. What's the buckle? What's the nearest potential buckle point?
Well, the real crisis is whether large Western European states,
Yeah,
the British, the French, the
Germans.
Germans, basically go to the Ukrainians and say, look, you got to take this.
Yeah.
Okay? We don't want to fall out with the United States and that we still have hope of working with Trump. So basically the war, you're going to have to take a peace dictated by Trump and Putin because we're not going to back you if you fight on. I hopefully they will not do that, but that is the buckle point. So a lot of the real control here going forward is in the hands of larger European states. Right now, they have not yet been up to the task. I don't think they fully want to admit that the world that they grew up in is gone. That's a big thing, James. The world all these policymakers grew up in, and in fact, in many cases, helped construct. That
Mm.
world is gone, but they don't want to admit it. If they can admit it, then they can move on and make the right choices. If it's simply too much for them, then they might end up screwing Ukraine.
I will have to wait and see. I suppose Merz, even more than Macron, has made some encouraging noises and some encouraging policy decisions. But as you say, until the pips start squeaking, you won't know which way they'll jump. I wonder if you'd answer another question for us. I know you're short of time, but this is what we've been concerning ourselves
Yeah.
with all morning before you joined us. Why do these strange men and women with whom Donald Trump has surrounded himself, the ones present
Yep.
in this security catastrophe over the weekend, why do they hate Europe so much?
Well, I'm not sure individually they do hate Europe. It's just they're broken people. There's sort of two groups around Trump. There are the true believers, the Putinites, the sort of Tulsi Gabbards,
Mm.
maybe the J.D. Vances, who simply that is now their worldview. They've internalized it to such a degree. Europe is bad, Russia is good, that this is actually what the United States should do. Despise Europe was the phrase that was
Yeah.
used in the chat. Then there are what I would call the broken men. And these are people, Mike Waltz, maybe Pete Hegseth, certainly Marco Rubio, who at least earlier in their career knew better and had a very different view. But what has happened is because Trump has, in a sense, crushed them individually, he's mocked them, but then brought them on board. They seem to have lost any ability to have independent thought. So they're just going with what Trump wants, and then they join the chorus of the true believers. But I think that's what it is, true believers and broken men.